Before I start this episode, I need to give a shout out to the CrimeCon Out crew. Kirsty, Amy, Ali and Chloe, who have helped me add to the decor. Now we're back in my beautiful home country of Wales for this requested episode, and we're going to a holiday park which is more known in rock music circles as the home to the Planet Rock festivals. But for one young man, this holiday park was less hidey-high and more shit. In an apparent case of mistaken identity, an 18-year-old lad was viciously beaten to death for apparently looking a bit like someone else. Not that the someone else would have deserved the same fate either. We'll be heading to Porthcawl on the South Wales coast to look at the 2015 murder of Connor Marshall. This is Murder of Crows. Connor Marshall lived in Barry with his mum Nadine and his dad Richard, known as Rich. They were a very close family, and in March of 2015, when Connor was planning a night away with friends at a local holiday park, he vowed to be home early the next day to celebrate his mum's birthday with her. His mum Nadine said the 18-year-old was sensible and could be trusted. She said as he left it was the usual "have fun and stay safe," and he was excited, he was buzzing, he was in a good place in his life. So she waved him off and expected him back the next day. Unfortunately, things wouldn't work out that way. The people who arrived at the home the next morning did not know Connor, but they'd been tasked with delivering some harrowing information to Nadine and Rich. When the knock on the door originally came at 7:30 a.m. on Sunday the 8th of March 2015, the couple were surprised that Connor had made it back home so early. Nadine thought he may not even have gone to bed and just come straight home after the night out. But when she opened the door to two police officers, her heart dropped and she feared the worst. Nadine said, "Straight away my heart dropped. They asked if I was the mum of Connor. They said there'd been an incident that Connor was involved in and that he was on his way to the hospital." After hurrying to University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff, a doctor told them that Connor was in resus with life-threatening injuries. The young man who had been waved off the previous day in a happy and positive mood was now a mess of bruises and blood and surrounded by a mass of life-saving equipment. I will show images of how Connor looked that day, but be warned that they are difficult to look at and are testament to the severity and duration of the beating he must have suffered. Obviously, seeing their child like this was a devastating shock for Nadine and for Richard. Nadine described the scene that confronted her. That image, that's the flashbacks that I get. The noise, the smell. Connor was on the bed with a big red cradle to keep his neck and head still. He just looked horrific. His face was just a mass of blue bruising and blood. He had a huge big gash on the top of his forehead. His lips were so swollen they were stopping him breathing through his nose. He had tubes and pipes, and it was just awful. There wasn't a piece of his face that wasn't bruised or bloodied. He had this hole in the side of his face, which we knew later was from a metal pole. When they pulled the blanket across, you could see footprints on his torso. He was hypothermic, and they had heaters blowing on him to try and warm him up. As Connor was in the hospital fighting for his life, the police were conducting an investigation into what had been a cruel and vicious attack on the young man. After speaking to witnesses and friends, police found out that Connor had been visiting a number of Porthcawl pubs with friends on the evening of the Saturday before heading towards where they were staying at the holiday park at around 1 or 2 a.m. And it was then that the fun night out took a turn, and a cockwomble called David Braddon became the antagonist in this tragic tale. It later became known that Braddon, spending a holiday at the holiday park but from Caerphilly, Braddon had taken 50 Valium tablets, cocaine, and had spent the night drinking alcohol. What a lightweight. Connor had become separated from his friends at this point, but he knew where he was going, so it was no big deal. But he was then approached by Braddon, and a devastating attack began. In what could possibly be described as a normal fight, Braddon and Connor wrestled on the ground until Connor lost consciousness. But things became far from normal after this. Braddon began stomping on Connor's head and kicking him in the ribs, while also beating him mercilessly with a metal pole. In an attempt to further humiliate the defenseless man, Braddon stripped him naked. But while doing so, he realized that Connor was not the man that Braddon thought that he was. Braddon had actually thought that Connor was a man called Adam Mallin. And what was the misdeed that Mallin had caused to Braddon that would have been worthy of such a fucking kicking? Well, Mallin was an ex-boyfriend of Braddon's estranged partner. Oh, well, that's okay then. You crack on, son. Oh, hang on. No, you fucking psychopath. You're not together anymore. Whinge, complain, cry into a pillow if you like. But one does not leather someone to the verge of death for having the audacity to get with someone you're not even with anymore, you freaking nutter. So Connor was left fighting for his life because he looked a bit like someone else to a doped up Neanderthal with the tolerance and patience of a fucking wasp. To add salt to the already devastating wounds, Connor would not be found for another 7 hours after early morning campers found the gravely injured man and raised the alarm. By this time, having headed back to his own caravan immediately after the attack, Braddon was already fleeing South Wales and on his way to Scotland. South Wales police visited over 200 caravans looking for witnesses as part of Operation Kenya, as well as speaking to Connor's friends about what had happened that night. CCTV showed Connor buying beer in a shop with his friends before leaving a bar on site and heading to a sports bar. CCTV then caught them leaving that bar before heading back to the caravan park at around 2 a.m. Half an hour later, Connor was captured on CCTV walking around outside, heading towards his caravan. After police arrived at the scene, they found a metal pole under a caravan with blood on it. On that metal pole was a fingerprint, and this fingerprint led to one man, David Braddon. The 26-year-old had a string of convictions from drug offences to assaulting a police officer, but when officers went to pay him a visit, he wasn't there. CCTV had caught Braddon leaving Treco Bay by car early Sunday morning before being dropped at Caerphilly station the next day. He travelled to the north of England via London. But while police interviewed his mother, he actually rang her, but he refused to hand himself in. And eventually the police managed to track him down in Glasgow. While all of this was happening, Connor was still fighting for his life, but things weren't looking good. And his injuries indicated what a one-sided beating he had suffered. Connor's injuries showed he did not even get the chance to fight back. Nadine Marshall described this ordeal saying, "I remember the detective saying, if you look at his hands, there's no marks. That means there was no fight. And that was just something else we as parents just had to take on." The day after being admitted to the hospital, one of the doctors came to speak to the family. He explained that things were looking bleak. Brain scans had shown Connor was not responding. But Nadine and Rich Marshall had noticed their son was twitching and were sure it was a sign he was recovering. But Nadine explained that they had the wrong impression. I asked the nurse if that was positive, if he was coming round. But she had to tell us, no, it's not. It's a symptom that things are getting worse. The doctor explained that despite what they were doing, he wasn't warming. He wasn't reacting in the way they would have hoped. The doctor was brutally honest and said it was irreversible. And I was sitting there thinking, this can't happen. Not to me. Not to my boy. But tragically, after 4 days and 4 nights by his side, Nadine and Rich said their final goodbyes to their son after making the heartbreaking decision to withdraw his life support. Following his arrest, Braddon was interviewed by police, where he described his account of what had happened, saying, "He was walking ahead of me the first time I recall him. He just turned around. There was like no one else about. It was darkness. I started saying, I don't know, started arguing, swearing and that. And he started swearing back. So I just assumed it was him. We started fighting and it just got out of control. I smacked his legs once or twice. I didn't want to cause him serious damage. I wanted to humiliate him. So I stripped his clothes and chucked his clothes on top of the caravans, punched him one more time, and that was it. Got my phone out and checked his face. He started speaking. I thought he'd get up, and I just panicked and went. I want to say I'm sorry for his family, his friends, and his fucking sister and that, to fucking see him like that. I didn't mean to fucking kill him." Now, I genuinely think this was a crime of passion, but it was still a senseless and horrific attack. If a victim is killed in a crime of passion, as opposed to by a serial killer, it doesn't make them any less dead. Braddon pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 20 years. When it was revealed that Braddon was on probation at the time of the attack, the spotlight was then shined on the probation services, and Nadine and Richard Marshall were heavily involved, wanting answers for why Braddon wasn't more closely monitored. And this became a central question in the coroner's inquest that followed 5 years after Connor's untimely death. Catherine Oakley was the officer responsible for Braddon's supervision, and at the inquest held in Pontypridd, it was laid bare the difficulties facing workers at this time. Oakley wept openly as she described being overwhelmed by her workload in the months before Braddon murdered Connor in an unprovoked attack. She said the Wales Community Rehabilitation Company, or CRC, was chaotic and short-staffed at the time she was supervising Braddon. Oakley said she was thrown into the deep end and was juggling 60 cases at the time of the incident. She was forced to stay in the office until midnight sometimes to try to catch up. Managers came and went frequently, and oversight of her work by her seniors was sporadic at best. Oakley said it was a very difficult environment. Some days I wouldn't leave my chair all day. One week I was seeing 15 to 20 people all day. Sometimes I worked until 12 at night. It was very difficult to keep tabs on things. Sometimes I didn't have time to sit down or even have lunch. You're talking about an impossible task. The inquest was told that Braddon, who was being supervised after being convicted of assaulting a police officer and drugs offences, missed a string of appointments and admitted that he was drinking and had stopped taking medication that was supposed to help his mental health problems. A barrister for Marshall's family suggested to Oakley that she could have taken firmer action against Braddon, to which Oakley replied, "If I had more time, I would have made more checks and had a more investigative approach." Now, I have some sympathy for Oakley, since it is clearly the system that is very, very broken, and no one individual should be scapegoated for the catastrophic failures. The Wales CRC was set up under the controversial 2013 probation reforms led by the former Justice Secretary Chris Grayling. 35 probation trusts were dismantled and replaced with 21 CRCs to manage low or medium risk offenders, while the National Probation Service looked after those posing a higher risk. In her witness statement for the inquest, Oakley said that staff were encouraged by managers not to take action against offenders that breached their licence conditions unless absolutely necessary, because the CRC lost money if this happened. In court, Oakley said the paid by results issue was rolled out by the press and the unions, and added that officers were encouraged to engage offenders rather than enforce breaches. The coroner found that the circumstances were not of the making of Oakley as the supervising officer, but of the Wales CRC in the levels of staffing, caseload and structures they had in place for managing and supervising new PSOs. Nadine Marshall, Connor's mother, said after the 2020 inquest, "Today is the culmination of almost 5 years of struggle to obtain truth and justice for Connor, and to find out why our much-loved son was the victim of a callous, unprovoked attack. The coroner's findings have vindicated what we have always known to be true, that the supervision of David Braddon was not robust, and the management system of Wales CRC was inadequate. This was a direct consequence of the chaos caused when probation services were privatised in this country. The coroner identified 7 major failures, and had these failures not occurred, we will never know whether our son Connor would still be here today."
It is hard to imagine anything worse than what Nadine and Richard Marshall have endured. And the pain of losing a child never fades.
You love your kids forever, and I'll miss my child forever. And that's exactly how I feel. You don't stop loving your kids. Never ever stop loving your kids till the day you die.
I miss Connor so much. And I don't want a single mum or family to feel this way, because it's just so horrible, it's exhausting, it's hurtful, it's never ending. And it's unfair.
It is almost 5 years since Connor was murdered, but not a day goes by that his parents don't think about that moment.
That picture is in my head all the time. And I just seen this human on the trolley. And then I realised it was Connor. As he was going past me, I realised it was Connor. And that was horrible. I only just recognised my own son. He'd been beaten that bad. Yes, people get into scrapes, they get into fights, they get into arguments, but to actually beat somebody that bad, to hit him with poles, the pole marks in his face, the footprints on his head, his internal organs were damaged. He just carried on beating him and then stripped him naked and just left him there to die. If a human being could do that, he shouldn't be on this earth.
And from day one, the fight for answers and the fight for change has driven them. It has not been easy.
I want to make sure that no other family is ever treated in the way that we've been treated by the probation system. I can't eradicate crime. I can't stop crime happening. But the way that victims are shunted around and ignored and belittled is completely unacceptable, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen.
One of their biggest disappointments is that the man who killed their son has had automatic access to support services, in total contrast to them as victims.
We've done nothing wrong, and yet we're the ones that's losing out. Our children, we've had to fight for counselling for the both of them all the way through. You know, he's just clicked his fingers, he's got a counsellor, he's got a doctor on hand, he's got this, he's got that. Whereas we've got to go fighting for it every step of the way. And if we can stop one family, just one family, through going for what we've been through, I think we've done a job.
The inquest may be over, but the trauma of what happened to Connor will always haunt them.
How do you survive each day? How do you keep going?
Life goes on, as Connor's tattoo said. I gotta keep going for my family, for my wife and my other 2 children.
How can you get closure from having your eldest son cold-bloodedly attacked and robbed, stripped, beaten and murdered? How do you move on from that? Inside I'm crumbling, and I crumble daily, but I have to keep doing it for Connor. Connor wouldn't want me to give up, and I won't.
They will never forgive, they will never forget, but they will fight on for Connor. Alexandra Hartley, ITV News.
Now, regardless where you put the blame, over and above Braddon being an impulsive and nasty thug, this was a tragedy that should never have happened. But there was a lasting legacy for Connor. The 18-year-old had been a passionate advocate for organ donation. Connor's mother, Nadine, explains how, amongst the trauma, fear, pain and sadness, Connor has been able to give an incredible gift, and that is the gift of life. The family were recipients of a St. John's Award for organ donation on Connor's behalf in 2015. She recalls when Connor discussed his decision to become an organ donor with her. When Connor turned 16 and applied for his provisional driving licence, he came to me to tell me he'd ticked the box on the form saying he wanted to be an organ donor. We had a discussion about it, and he was very adamant that if anything ever happened to him, he would like to be considered as a donor. I never dreamt that that moment would come just 2 years later. After Connor was found at the caravan park, he was taken to University of Wales Hospital Cardiff, where he was put on a life support machine in intensive care. We knew the situation was very serious and grave. However, despite the horrendous circumstances, my husband and I and our other children drew a lot of comfort from the way the hospital managed everything. After 4 days of Connor being in hospital, the doctors came to tell us that no more could be done for Connor, and that with our agreement his life support machine was to be turned off. At this point, the organ transplant team approached us and informed us that Connor was a registered organ donor, and asked us how we felt about honouring his decision to donate his organs. Now, the extent of Connor's injuries was such that only his kidneys and liver could have been viably transplanted at that time. Nadine said, "At first I really didn't want to. I felt Connor had been through enough traumas with the attack and the horrific injuries he had sustained. However, as well as being aware that his decision was to be an organ donor, Connor also had a tattoo on his arm reading, 'Life goes on.' And for us that was very poignant. Being given the opportunity to support Connor's decision to donate his organs, felt like a great opportunity to allow this to happen, to allow Connor's life to go on in someone else. There was no way of saving Connor, but Connor has been able to save other people's lives through organ donation. The specialist nurses explained everything so well and sensitively, as well as managing the organ donation side of things. They also spoke to us about making handprints of Connor and saving some of his hair for a locket. All of this really helped in such a horrible situation. As a family, we are very proud that Connor had this tattoo, and we were able to honour his decision. Connor has given an incredible gift. This was what Connor wanted, and we supported his decision to become a donor. And as a result of donating organs, Connor saved 3 lives after his tragic death. This video is obviously dedicated to Connor Marshall, who died just because he vaguely resembled someone else, and rather than checking, not that the attack would have been acceptable under any circumstances, but rather than checking, decided to just bash first and ask questions later. It's such a shame, and Connor was destined to be a shining light in the world, and the only crumb of comfort we can take is that 3 people had the chance to live following the donation of Connor's organs. I send love and condolences to the family and friends of Connor Marshall. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. It means an awful lot to Samson and to me. I'm Steve. This monster is Samson. And we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that